So here, our purpose today is the Main Street Reconstruction Task Force, which unfortunately for the task force I am on, but I'm not presenting today. So the mayor is here, Alex Alon, Lori Hoffman. Together they are going to present to you where the task force stands and what the future holds for Watertown, especially for Main Street. So who's up first? All right, come on up. I got to turn everybody on. There's two. Oh, you need that.
Thanks, Steve. Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for coming out this morning. Just want to say again, thanks to Steve and Maranatha for being such gracious hosts. This is my second time here, and I'm quickly learning that this is a breakfast not to miss. For those of you who I haven't connected with yet, my name is Alex Alon, Initiatives and Development Coordinator with the city. I've been here for roughly half a year now, and I'm enjoying every moment of it. I'm joined here with the Watertown's own Mayor McFarland and Lori Hoffman, who has been in the community since 1996 and has 4 grandkids and has been part of the team for the past 5 months that we've been going through our process. So before I let those two kind of talk you through the meat of what we've been doing, I'll just give a little bit of background and some of the process that we've been stepping through. So the Downtown Main Street Reconstruction Task Force, which is a mouthful, started in April. So we've been going for 5 months, and it was born out of, in 2026, the Wisconsin Department of Transportation will be doing a complete reconstruction of the Cole Bridge on Main Street. And the city sought to sort of take advantage of that opportunity and do essentially a block-by-block reconstruction of Main Street. The map above kind of outlines where that'll be, essentially from Church Street all the way to Sharp Corner Park. And there's aging infrastructure under the road. The road itself is in less than stellar shape. There have been different analogies, something about four-wheeling, all kinds of different things about Main Street at the moment. The last time that Main Street was reconstructed in Watertown was 1967. So roughly 40 years. That just to give you a sense of the importance of what this task force is all about. Infrastructure is extremely long-lived. So we wanted to take our time. We're about 3 years ahead of schedule, 3 to 5 years ahead of schedule, and make sure that we're outlining everything that this reconstructed Main Street needs to be, because it's going to be there for a while. We might not get another opportunity until, what would that be, 2060, 2070? Are those even real numbers? So the task force itself is comprised of 11 members, although we just added our 12th a couple weeks back. We have representatives from state and city, a couple members from our engineering department. There's a member of the community here in Watertown who works for the Department of Transportation, and she is on the task force, and she has been a really valuable resource for us in terms of being a bridge to the state and thinking about what we can and can't do, because Main Street is a state highway, State Highway 19, so there are some restrictions along with that. We have several elected officials, 2 council members, or excuse me, 1 council member, and Mayor McFarland. We have some representatives from a couple different downtown organizations, as well as some from the business community, both downtown and across Watertown. And then Ms. Hoffman from the community at large, and we just added a member from the Youth Advisory Council, which I'm particularly excited about. It's always, as a geek for local government, it's kind of exciting for me to see young people kind of interested in that. So that's our makeup. And so for the past 5 months, we've been in phase 1 of this 3-pronged approach, but essentially what we're doing is engaging in a visioning process of what we want to see as a reconstructed Main Street. That's everything from streetscape to infrastructure and more. And then, so we spent the first 3 to 4 months doing that as a task force, and part of the presentation, or the presentation today, is a part of sort of this public engagement, trying to generate feedback. There's some surveys on the table as you exit, if you wouldn't mind. There's some business cards as well as physical surveys. The cards themselves have a little QR code that you can take the survey on our set of recommendations and give us some feedback. We'd really appreciate that. That's a big part of our goal here, is to get an understanding of not just, while we have a body that is representative of a lot of different pieces of the community, we wanted to get direct feedback from you all as well. So please take advantage of that opportunity. And then after we step through this piece of the process, another big piece of this is going to be giving our downtown businesses and the business community at large our support. And that means the community as well. Each block is going to be shut down for a period of time, and the businesses downtown are going to be affected by that, and we're going to work with them closely over the next 2 years to sort of preempt any issues that might arise. And then as we go through construction, just being there as a task force and as a community and as a city for those businesses to make sure they make it through. We don't want to lose anybody because of this process. Our team consulted through a number of different documents that are in place with the city. In 2014, there was a riverfront and redevelopment design plan, which the town square was born out of. There's some different design guidelines in there. There's also, I think it was 2016, there's a riverfront and river walk design plan. And then obviously the city has a comprehensive plan, which for those of you who aren't familiar is essentially, it's a document that guides development for roughly the next 20 years of a city, 20 to 40 years of a city, and it is essentially a city's strategic plan, if you will. So we looked through that, and then, as I mentioned, we had presentations throughout our time from the individual from the Department of Transportation, as well as representatives from the Main Street program downtown to talk a little bit more about what Main Street has been historically. There's been a number of different construction projects in downtown. In 2020, Sharp Corner Park was done. The library is currently undergoing their expansion, and it is looking more and more amazing day by day. The town square will be starting construction ideally over the winter, do some winter work down by the riverbank when the ground is frozen. That will be completed in 2022, and then in 2026, as I mentioned, the Main Street, or the Cole Bridge, will be undergoing a full reconstruction by the Department of Transportation. Our timeline is kind of outlined for you here. Again, we started our kickoff meeting April 27th. We're stepping through sort of this visioning process and the community engagement process now, at which point, when we sort of complete our set of recommendations, which we'll go over, Ms. Hoffman and the mayor will kind of present those will get presented to Public Works, who will be basically spearheading this construction effort for us to get their feedback and their blessing, so to speak, on this. At which point we'll start engaging with the business community and gearing up for reconstruction. So our process was sort of threefold in terms of getting our recommendations down. We wanted to establish a set of overall project goals and then go through and create the detailed wants and needs. And ultimately, we ended up with 2 lists of roughly 20 recommendations each, tailored specifically towards Main Street construction, which was the original scope of our group. And then we also wanted to branch out and do a set of recommendations for downtown as a whole. When we started going through this process, there were some important things that we wanted to say, even though downtown is sort of outside the scope of the reconstruction effort. There were things that we wanted to be able to communicate and sort of formalize in this document that we felt were important for the entire downtown area. So the process to get our evaluation criteria, or those high-level concepts for our project goals, we started with literally just a brainstorming session, popcorn style. I stood up in front of City Hall with a whiteboard, and people communicated what they felt was important conceptually in this project. So some of the examples are up on this slide here. They wanted a low-stress environment. They wanted it to be engaging for people walking downtown. So these were some of the pieces that sort of went into that. And then our criteria that we settled on after going through this sort of ranking and scoring system were, first and foremost, we wanted a reconstructed Main Street to be high quality design. We wanted it to be pedestrian friendly and retail and commercial oriented, and those three sort of tied together. Those are this idea that we want engagement, that we want people to be active in our downtown and to be visiting our downtown businesses. And there's this concept called sticky streets, which is you want, from a retail perspective and from a community engagement perspective, you want people to stay. You don't want people just, this is not a corridor, essentially, it's a place. It's a place-making strategy where people can stay and gather and visit our businesses and communicate with one another and really get to know your neighbors. The fourth piece of that, we wanted to highlight that we want everything to be universally accessible and be ADA compliant. Obviously, everything in this reconstruction will be ADA compliant, but we wanted to go beyond that. We wanted to take into consideration people who have visual impairments, different things that are beyond the ADA so that we can make this a space that everybody can inhabit and enjoy. And then lastly, we wanted to do two things. We wanted to be both forward-looking, again, because infrastructure is long-lived, so we needed to at least attempt to anticipate what might be coming down the line. And then because we have such a strong historic district downtown, we wanted any design recommendations to be responsive to that and reflective of that. After we set those initial project goals, we went through and we did the detailed wants and needs in a similar process. Again, brainstorming popcorn style, throwing everything out there that we might want, at which point we scored them against how well they fit with our project goals and finalized our two lists. And I will have Ms. Hoffman go through our recommendations for Main Street.
Hi, so this is just for Main Street. The mayor will be doing the overall downtown. Main Street recommendations fit into three categories: aesthetics, infrastructure, and pedestrian oriented. Our aesthetic recommendations are aimed at creating a vibrant and engaging place for visitors and community members. Oops. Sorry, I'm new at this. There we go. The first item on aesthetic recommendations are murals. We have a lot of great murals downtown, but they need updating and maintenance, and we would like to see some new ones as well. Our team also recommends art or sculptures on sidewalks to engage visitors and encourage people to stop and linger in front of downtown businesses. We would like to see flower pots installed at the pedestrian level so that maintenance would be more accessible. Oh, sorry. Oh, shoot. Thank you. Told you I'm new at this. We would like to see well-designed trash receptacles. Vistas. We have the opportunity to create some lovely views. The soon-to-be completed Town Square overlooks the Rock River, with Sharp Corner Park at the east end of Main Street and a beautiful architecture of St. Bernard's Church on the west. We recommend capitalizing on these assets by designing ways to set up vistas in strategic locations. When people enter downtown, we want them to know that they're in a special place. To that end, we recommend the installation of an entrance feature. We don't know what this looks like yet, or where we are going to put this entrance feature, but we wanted to include that in our plan. Last, with outdoor dining and gathering spaces becoming increasingly popular, we recommend the installation of permanent parklets and pedlets on Main Street. There we go. A parklet is a sidewalk extension that provides extra usable space As you can see, the foot traffic is on the sidewalk while the parklet provides seating. A pedlet is the opposite of a parklet. The former sidewalk area will be used for seating and amenities, while the pedlet functions as the new sidewalk. Parklets and pedlets are installed in parking lanes and look like bump outs. Bump outs have an additional advantage in that they slow speeding traffic. Okay, infrastructure recommendations. The city will look at infrastructure during the DOT's reconstruction of Main Street, but we included this in our recommendations because we want to express our support for upgrading the utilities during the reconstruction. Parking is a big piece of successful downtown business environment, so we recommend an evaluation of parking on Main Street to determine the best approach. Installing infrastructure for electric vehicle charging stations. Infrastructure is long-lived, as Alex said, and this is a rare chance to plan for future changes. This is why we recommend the installation of infrastructure for EV charging stations. This doesn't mean that the installation of the stations themselves, but ensuring that the necessary infrastructure is there should we choose to install them later. Improve traffic light designs, such as stoplights that allow pedestrians to stop traffic to cross the street, as well as lights that are more visible for drivers. We also recommend taller lampposts to avoid damage and provide better lighting coverage. Install infrastructure for 5G on poles. This includes installation of mounts and connections. Again, this is just the infrastructure. One advantage of 5G would be increasing capacities for security systems that depend on the internet for connectivity. We recommend the installation of mounts and connections for underlighting the Cole Bridge. This is a good example of bridge underlighting. Not too dramatic, but still noticeable, and it creates a nice ambiance. These installations would not be integrated into the bridge construction itself, since the DOT would not provide funding for that kind of integration. This means that the lighting would be surface mounted, but still structurally sound. Pedestrian-oriented recommendations. A hallmark of a vibrant downtown is that it is walkable and geared toward pedestrian traffic. With that in mind, we recommend wider sidewalks to better accommodate pedestrians, as well as space for downtown businesses to temporarily locate amenities on the sidewalk. Create meeting spaces. We want downtown visitors to stay and linger, spending time in well-designed gathering spaces and enjoying conversations on comfortable, high-quality seating. This activates our downtown. Install well-designed seating at pedestrian-friendly intervals, so you don't get so tired. You have a place to sit as you're walking the downtown. Install well-designed wayfinding signage, which point pedestrians, drivers, and bicyclists to town centers, public parking, and other points of interest. This makes the downtown experience less stressful and more enjoyable. Install curb bump outs in strategic locations to slow down speeding vehicles. Crosswalk recommendations focus on safety and stress reduction. Relocate crosswalks for improved pedestrian flow, include features for deaf and blind people, and create Continental Crosswalks. This is an example of a wayfinding sign. This one is geared toward pedestrian traffic and bicycle traffic. These are examples of curb bump outs. While these can be used for traffic calming, they can also improve the landscape and aesthetics. The upper right picture shows a substantial bump out at a key intersection, calming traffic and giving pedestrians a shorter roadway to cross. The picture in the lower right shows a bump out that makes use of natural infrastructure to help drain stormwater. Continental crosswalks are striped, high-visibility crosswalks that alert drivers to the presence of pedestrians. The designs can be very creative. I'll turn this over to Mayor McFarland.
I just want to note, too, that so for most of these recommendations, we didn't propose specific locations. We wanted to keep it conceptual in nature. We're not necessarily design experts on what should go where. At some point, that'll have to happen, but at this stage, they're out there in terms of a concept that we want, and then the locations will be determined as we go along.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. The reason that Alex provided kind of the step through of how we got to this juncture is because we think it's really important for people to realize we didn't sit in a room, just the 12 of us, and decide the fate of what happened kind of willy-nilly. So we used a process that I used a lot at the state. It was called Kepner-Trago. It's a decision-making process that allows people to provide, in our case, I think we're up to 70 different recommendations, and narrow them down into something that's actually manageable and implementable by making you give it a number. So we use those criteria to evaluate those 70 ideas, and that's how we came up with the 20 that Lori just described to you, and I'll describe to you about another 20. Some of those are going to overlap, but some are different as well. So if you think back to that first slide where Alex showed you the map of the downtown and there was the green outline, what I'm about to share with you will align with that green outline. So our recommendations for downtown also had to align, of course, with aesthetic improvements. And Lori already talked about the updating and installation of new murals. I think the one that jumps off the page for me here is the improvement of the aesthetics in our parking lot. Contrary to popular belief, we know that we actually have enough parking in the downtown, which is surprising, I think, to people. The problem is it's in the wrong spot. And we don't do a great job of identifying it. So improving our parking lots, whether it's through small things like landscaping, better signage, trees, all of those items are going to help people identify where parking lots are located. And I'll talk a little bit more about our parking in a few slides. We talked also about removing vegetation to open up views to the river. We've seen an incredible amount of traffic on our river. I have the blessing of being on the second floor of City Hall, and Alex just pointed it out earlier this week. People are on that river all day, every day. They're kayaking, they're paddleboarding, they're fishing. So we need to continue to leverage the Rock River for what it is, and cleaning up the vegetation along the river, not removing it all, but pruning it back where it needs to be cleaned up and opening it up where it can provide some views and some better access is pretty important. And then this is the big one, and I shared this, I think, one other time, but so often when you're in jobs like I am, people will say, why can't we be like fill in the blank? We hear Cedarburg a lot. I know Mayor David always heard Cedarburg. I hear Oconomowoc from time to time. And the truth is, our downtown is really incredible. We have the state's longest historic downtown. We'll never be like those cities, and I don't think anyone in this room should want us to be. What we need to do better, and what the task force identified, is just improving and softening the aesthetic of our downtown. So that's things like planting trees, having the lower flower pots, things that will reduce the view of cement from top to bottom. This is an example of parking lot aesthetics. You can see it's nothing, too jazzy. It's easy to maintain. You'll see the photo on the right has just small half walls, things that can just identify the lots that we do have. Our infrastructure recommendations, if you're a person like me or anyone in local government, infrastructure someday, believe it or not, does become more attractive to you than the fun things that we got to talk about on this task force. So we talked about things like decorative lighting. We have, 2 sets of light poles in our downtown. I think it's safe to say those 2 will not remain once we do this reconstruction. So having aesthetically pleasing and historically relevant lighting that also provides the necessary lumens we need is something that we're recommending. Lori touched base on the EV charging stations and the 5G. So I won't say too much about that, other than that if you leave this room, please don't think that we're going to be at the cutting edge of 5G. We're just trying to have the foresight to make sure that we have the conduit in place. So she touched on that, but I think it's really important for people to remember we're just kind of strategically planning forward so that when the time comes, we're ready to go. Reconstructing and improving the seawalls along the downtown is something that we have felt the pinch of for at least the last 2 years. I'm sure you all are aware the plaza is closed in the downtown. That plaza is closed because the seawall has failed. To replace one section of that seawall, and to put it in perspective, there's 8 sections, is $150,000. And then because that seawall went without repair for so long, our plaza is also structurally unsound. So we do have a plan that the Public Works Commission approved, and we have stepped through that plan for the reconstruction of that plaza. But acknowledging that, we have seawalls up and down the river throughout this community, and they just haven't been maintained at the level that we need them to be maintained at. So we're looking at a different type of maintenance where appropriate, that we as our city team, with the equipment and the talent that we have, can maintain these seawalls. So seawalls are going to be necessary, and when I say seawall, picture just literally a wall along the sea. Those will be necessary in some places just with the flow of the river, but where we can, we'll likely be recommending removing those and putting in natural embankments. Just, riprap that would naturally go up the bank, because that's something that we can maintain on our own. The last one, I have to admit, and I said this before too, so forgive me if you've heard me say this, I had no idea what a multi-use bubbler was, not a clue. And someone came to us and said, hey, we'd really like to donate a multi-use bubbler. Well, here's what it is. And things like this are really powerful because they make people feel comfortable and welcomed. So if you're walking your pet in the downtown and you can stop and allow them to get a drink of water, we heard from the Wisconsin State Main Street program that things like this really make an impact. Our next set of recommendations were in order for it to be pedestrian orientated. And what we talked about earlier, the well-identified, kind of creatively designed wayfinding signage. We have nice wayfinding signage throughout the community now, but it directs you to places like this, and to the YMCA, and to the library. We're looking for wayfinding signage that will direct you to perhaps districts in the downtown or sections of the downtown that have certain types of businesses. I'm going to show you an example of meeting spaces in just a moment, but we also talked about identifying spaces for winter activities. And if you grew up in Watertown and you're around my age or maybe even older than me, you probably spent a lot of time at the Brickyard or at Silver Creek, enjoying everything that this community has to offer in the winter. And I'm really happy to say we're bringing a lot of that back. If you've driven by Silver Creek on Water Street, the warming house was there last week. It's supposed to be removed for some floodplain. We're very compliant with ourselves. We'll be removing that and bringing it back in the winter time. But we're just looking to kind of reinvigorate the community during the winter months as well. So we're acknowledging that we need a space in our downtown for winter activities and programming. And then we're also talking about the implementation of temporary closures of certain streets. So we've seen, just tremendous growth in the downtown. There's been an incredible amount of private investment, which is exciting. It means that the community is believing in the momentum that, we're putting forth as a government with the library and the Town Square project. So in order to accommodate that, we've gotten tons of requests for temporary closures of streets. There are ways that we can design around some of that. This is an example of a downtown meeting space, and I want to sit there. And that's what we want you to want to do too. Come to our downtown, host your meetings outside, have your lunch outside, and have a meeting space where you can get together and support the merchants that we have in our community. The next and last is planning recommendations, and I have to be honest with you, after infrastructure, planning is probably my next favorite, and it's because it's a really exciting time to be able to identify problems and solve them, which is really cool that you get to do that in government. So we are talking here about performing a comprehensive parking study, and you're going to hear me say in a moment, there's some things that can happen well before the reconstruction of Main Street. There's some things that are already happening now, and this is one of them. So we completed a parking study through a partnership with the Redevelopment Authority a couple of years ago. Our engineering department just completed a parking study this summer, and then we have a parking study that takes those two studies and combines them with the third. So the first parking study talked about high traffic days. I think they were here on Homecoming. If you've been in Watertown on Homecoming, you'll understand how busy the downtown is. The parking study that our engineering department did was literally sitting in our parking lots and along our streets and counting spaces. It sounds kind of rudimentary, but it was really important for us to know how many spaces were open during the day, on the weekends, and on busy days. So we did the Chamber 100th anniversary celebration, and we also did a random day of the week, and we stationed people in those different city parking lots. What the third study is going to do is take those two, the really busy days, the regular days, and through a grant from the Wisconsin Main Street program, they're going to say where we need that parking. So we know we have enough. We all hypothesize it's not in the right place and probably experience that it's not in the right place. So how do we strategically readjust that parking allocation to better match the needs and the walkability of the community? The next thing is to perform a transportation evaluation study. This is just a really fancy way of saying, do we need one-way streets? And how do we better accommodate bikes and pedestrians? When I was on the city council, I was on the Public Works Commission, and someone came in and requested that we remove one-way streets. And I was like, that's an interesting request. What do we have to support having them or not having them? And some of you in this room were on that body with me at that time, and we had a transportation study from 1972. That is the study that actually instituted one-way streets in the downtown. And as we all know, our days of driving downtown and sitting there and hanging out are no longer the days that we have now. My friends and I, we drove up and down Main Street, and I'm sure some of you sitting in this room sat on Main Street. But that's just not the way our traffic flows anymore. So we are acknowledging here that we need some type of evaluation of that traffic flow, and we'd like for that to also be accommodating to bike and pedestrian traffic. We are an honorable mention bike and pedestrian friendly community, and it works with the brand of who we are about outdoor recreation. We'd like to be more than honorable mention, and traffic studies like this will help. An implementation plan for developing the Riverwalk to the north of the Cole Street Bridge. So we have a full plan. The plan is somewhat dated. We've done parts of it, not all of it. We will, when the town square and the Terrence Wall development are completed, we will have a complete loop on the south of the bridge, which I think is a profound accomplishment. So we're recommending planning for the north side. And then the one that I think is pretty neat is the development of alley restoration plans. So we know, and I'll talk about this in a moment as well, we know that we're going to need to reactivate our alleys for our businesses to have access during the reconstruction of Main Street. So this is one of those things that we'll have to do beforehand. And then the last is planning for green infrastructure improvements in the downtown. And when I say green infrastructure, people tend to jump to really exciting and innovative things. We're talking about, pretty, maybe those, but more in the near future, things like rain gardens, permeable pavers. We have just a copious amount of requirements from the state of Wisconsin, Department of Natural Resources, on what we do with the water that falls out of the sky. And in order to accommodate those, we have to be involving some of these components into our planning activities. So before I ask you for your feedback, so start thinking on it now. This is what you'll see from us next. So we will be taking all of this feedback, as Alex said, and taking it back to the task force and then incorporating it into the final recommendations that we provide to the Public Works Commission. The Public Works Commission will then begin to identify recommendations that we can address prior to the reconstruction of Main Street, and then we'll begin implementing those items. So things like the parking study will happen before, alley restoration will happen before, but there will certainly be things that would happen after the reconstruction of the bridge. I want to just mention too, so one of those items that may happen before, and I really mean may, we have 11 blocks that need to be redone. Some of the blocks are pretty far away from the construction area. They're far away from the Main Street Bridge. They may not be on the traffic route that heavy equipment will take. So there may be the potentiality to do one of those blocks or two of those blocks beforehand. But I think the safest thing to bet is the bridge will come in 2026 and the reconstruction will come block by block after that. And we foresee that probably being around 2 years of work. So certainly not something that's going to be painless, but the work of our task force and of our city government is to make it as painless as it can be. So with that, we want to make sure that we can answer your questions. I see Mr. Board has a microphone that I'm guessing he's going to want to rush to someone. So who's the first? Yep.
Of course. Not so much of a question, but some feedback. I don't see a whole lot of technology in the infrastructure that we kind of talked about today. And one thing that I would suggest is, as you look at the new signage, for example, a lot of communities now, and even organizations or public spaces, as you put up that post to put your sign on to say parking to the left, public pool to the right, whatever, that can be a 5G antenna. And if you want an example, if you go to the Milwaukee Zoo, a lot of their signage in the zoo now that shows the gorilla exhibit here, lion here, that's actually a hidden 5G antenna. And there's Li-Fi that's coming out into the future, which will replace Wi-Fi. So as you look at your new street signs or new street lights, can we make those street lights Li-Fi? And it's another revenue source for the city, right? So as I'm walking down the street using my phone, and now I'm attached to Li-Fi to get to Google or wherever I want to go, that could be another revenue source for the city, present coupons, present other ads, whatever the case may be. But I think there's a whole technology component as we look to the future, maybe not so much what's here today, but what's coming 5 years, 10 years, and we want this infrastructure to be here for a very long time. I think we need to kind of map out from a city, where do we want our technology in the downtown? It may be cameras at some day, and maybe other things that we're saying would be of value or a necessity. We've already got the infrastructure foundation put in place.
Thank you.
So,
That's a good
yep.
suggestion.
Yeah, and so we do have a recording back here, I believe. Steve, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll all take the feedback from here and incorporate that too. And just to your point, there is a large, it's not necessarily a new movement, but smart cities where they're doing all kinds of infrastructure and technology incorporated into infrastructure. And just to sort of reiterate, so our public works department is going to be, they have all this in mind. So they are definitely taking everything into consideration as they go forward. We also wanted to put some of these in our formal document just as sort of a backup piece to the thought process that they're going to be doing with that. But that's great feedback. Thank you.
We do want to better influence the small business and big business in this community to help you in this process, because obviously there's going to be a financial burden on probably the taxpayers when you come here, which is great, but if you have better influence by your small and large businesses, that's going to also help to offset this. And what are you also going to do about erasing the previous red flags and black flags in this community to get more business back into this community?
Sure. So I'll touch on the first one, your first question first. And you'll see the last step here is, actually, is that the slide that has it? I'm not even going to find the slide that has it. So we are at the second step of a multi-step process. And the step that comes after, and everyone that signed up to be on the task force, some of who are sitting in this room, agreed that when we are done dreaming and wanting of the dream and want list, and we have presented an implementable plan, and Public Works does their work, that it's then back to us as a task force to work hand in hand with the business owners in the downtown, pre, during, and post-construction, to make sure that they have everything that they need to ensure that their business can operate during this reconstruction. I know it seems daunting. I've seen photos from 1960. I have to think we can be even better than we were then, and we survived then. So I'm not going to be a Pollyanna about it. We're going to certainly have our hiccups. We saw that with the reconstruction of the 2nd Street Bridge. But I think what we're doing this time, in perhaps a larger way, is preemptively planning for the support of our businesses. So for us, that looks like literally assigning task force members to sections of the downtown. And then they will be that conduit and the liaison between the business owners that they're communicating with and the answers that they need from the city or from the state. I'll touch really briefly, because the last question you asked me I could talk about for a very, very long time. What are we doing to encourage business in this community? Alex is a living example of the investment that this community and this government and my team and I have made in development and retention and expansion of our business base. Alex is the first time, and he's been here for 6 months, that we have invested in that with a body. Prior to that, it was something that would happen through various outlets. I spent, the last 2 years trying to do it in conjunction with all the other things that we do as mayor, and realized that we weren't going to get very far. So Alex and I have been doing, and some of you in this room we've been to, have been doing business visits. We try to do at least 2 a month. We're going large, very large, and we're going very small. And we generally tour the facility, and we sit down before and after and say, what do you need? What do you need from us as your government? What are we doing wrong? What are we doing right? And then we also have been kind of coalescing around a few ideas, and honestly, I'm going to stop then because Alex knows I can talk about this for a long time. Labor shortage is a huge problem, and that's not unique to us. You all have seen the news. So what can we do to actually solve that problem locally? And for us, it's tackling it in a little bit of a unique way. We have learned through these business visits that childcare is a real problem. We have manufacturers that have, not overly complicated shift structures, but shift structures that are unique. Childcare providers open at 6, shifts start before 6. They're on the weekends. We have no one on the weekends. We have some, but so we're focusing on 2 different childcare efforts with our business community. And then the other big thing that we've been working on is and I'm from here. Every time I go into one of your businesses, I'm floored by what's happening inside. We have businesses in this community that invented things during the pandemic that are being used worldwide. We have businesses in this community that make a product, and they are the only manufacturer of that product for every single beverage in the entire world. So we have really unique manufacturers here, but we don't tell that story. So we have retooled our media and productions department, and they are going out into the community, into our businesses, and literally recording the uniqueness that's happening there, and then we're marketing that. Not only marketing it throughout the region, but we're marketing it inside our own city. We want to keep the students at Watertown High School, at Maranatha Baptist University, at Madison College, at Luther Prep here. We want them to stay here, so we have to do a better job of telling them what's happening here and the opportunity that they have here. I'm going to keep it there, but if you want more, just to reach out. Business retention and expansion is something that we've been working on a lot.
Yeah, I would just chime in and echo everything the mayor just said, but also, the reconstruction is not going to happen until 2026, 2027, into 2028. By getting ahead of it now and engaging with our business community, we have time to sort of build trust and build these collaborative partnerships to then address those as a team. So there's this piece of it from the task force side and from the city side of being a support piece for all these businesses, but we don't have the answers. We can't come in and say, this is how we're going to solve this issue, or this issue, or this is how we're going to plan for that. We can help, but ultimately that's going to be getting everybody together and solving this and planning for this as a business community, as an overall broader community. So the support's going to come from everywhere, and I think we're starting that process now, and that's only going to build, and we have a little bit of time, and I think it's to our advantage that we're doing this now, or starting this process now. So I hope that answers at least part of the question. Thank you.
Who let you answer a question?
I'm just going to ask a question. Looks great. Looks expensive.
Yeah.
How do we pay for it?
Great question. So everything that happens on this screen isn't going to happen in the next 5 years, the next 10 years. But it needs to get planned for, or it won't happen at all. So what we kind of acknowledged at the Foresight is the people on the Main Street Task Force are appointees. They have no financial authority, no offense to any of you. Well, some of you do, but via different committees, to commit our community to anything monetarily. But what they can do is be a part of that financial planning process by producing this type of report. So when I started leading my team, we produced a 5-year capital plan. That 5-year capital plan gets revisited and reused after every single budget cycle. So once this plan is formally adopted by the Public Works Commission, that plan will begin to filter into our 5-year capital plan. Some of this, like the reconstruction itself, we borrow about $1.5 million to reconstruct and resurface and maintain our city streets. Obviously, when we come to this project that year, there's going to be a portion, I would suspect, if I was still here, of that allocation going to this reconstruction versus reconstruction throughout other areas of the community. And then we also know through the Town Square project that there are certain amenities that are funded through some grants through the state, and we have been much more, we spent a lot more time going after those, which is not cheap. I mean, there's an opportunity cost to that too. But we've been successful, and we're trying to be strategic about the ones we think we can win. And some of our stormwater management ones are ones that can be won. So the short answer is really to begin to fold it into our 5-year capital plan, and then it'll become just regular parts of our borrowing, frankly, which is how we fund the vast majority of our capital improvements in the community over the course of time.
So the bridge underlighting, that looked kind of interesting. What is the point of that?
Good question. 2 things. One, way more heavily weighted than the other. So it's obviously going to provide some level of light. It's certainly not going to provide light at a navigable level. It is sheerly aesthetic. And some of that's okay. You know, we have skirted around that, and I'll own that. I've been on this council for 8 years. You know, we haven't had the flexibility or the capacity or the strategy to be able to do some of these aesthetic improvements. And things like that that are low cost, and this one will be one of those low cost items, are things that we can do that have a big impact. And the reason it's low cost is it can't be wired into the bridge. So we're looking at things that would be mounted and then maintained by us versus things that would have conduit running through the structure itself. The DOT doesn't pay for aesthetic lights. They just pay for concrete bridges.
It's a piece of sort of that placemaking strategy of increasing the appeal and the engagement with downtown. But I will say also that we had a presentation last Tuesday for the community as well, and somebody asked specifically about the underlighting for the bridge, if that actually provided any light for people on the water. So if somebody's out there kayaking at midnight, they will get some light.
So with this new idea, it seems pretty interesting and very feasible, but my question is what are you going to do to keep something in place after you're gone to keep this ball rolling, to keep getting the businesses here and keep them here, that we don't fall off like 1960, 1970 again?
So the short and instinctual answer is the 200 people I work with every day. We have focused in the last 2 years intentionally on continuity. You know, I'm here for at most 6 years. So we have invested time and resource in ensuring that we have the internal capacity and the documented strategy for someone to pick up and keep leading. And we've made some pretty tough structural changes in order to accommodate that. We switched to a public works director this year. That wasn't without its headaches in making that structural change, but organizational changes like that were important so that we had the continuity regardless of who has my job. Does anyone want to add to that? I really feel like that's the answer, though. And obviously, an empowered elected officials, and they can't make the best decisions without these types of plans as well. I sat in that room with a plan from 1972 and couldn't make a decision, obviously, because the plan was, from 1972. So we're trying to kind of preempt some of those barriers that could come up with administration changes, with staffing changes, by having well-documented, well-supported, well-structured strategic plans that our city employees can continue to lead with the guidance and the approval of our elected officials. That sounds really dreamy. And if I'm sitting in your chair, I'm like, yeah, right, Emily. But I can tell you, we have there's some of my colleagues sitting in this room. That's an example of the culture shift. We've turned the page, and I feel really strongly about that. So I don't worry that if that team is still there, we will get this done.
I don't think that's dreamy at all. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. And so one of the things that drew me to this job actually is one of the documents that we referenced here. In 2014, there was this redevelopment initiative, a plan that was put in place in 2014. And from my perspective, I saw that, and I saw that the town square was in that plan, and here the community is acting upon that plan. That doesn't really happen. And I said in my very first interview, I said kudos to Watertown, because usually those plans go and they sit on a shelf for 20 years and nobody sees them again. But this was something that was being implemented, and my understanding was this was obviously before you were elected as a mayor. So that, to me, is an example of the continuity that's already in place, albeit not in the sense that you're talking about in terms of retaining businesses and those types of things, but there is precedence for continuity of a strategy. And I think, this initiative that we're doing right now and what we put forth in the recommendations right now is establishing that right now for future continuity and for that thread that continues on to future administrations. So I don't think it's impossible at all. I think it just takes political will, and I think it takes you guys. It takes community will. If you want that continuity, that's going to happen. Like, you have the say in voting. You have the say in how your community looks. So what you want to continue, I would encourage you to advocate for that.
So I've lived in a number of small towns, and many of them with the downtowns like ours that have older buildings, and people have largely moved out, away from those central. What makes you think Watertown is going to be any different when you try and revitalize the downtown versus all these other thousands of small towns that have tried the same thing, invested millions of dollars that we pay for, you don't?
Well, I pay taxes too, but.
Government doesn't pay it, the people do. And what are you doing now to avoid being just another one of those small towns that spent all this money and gained very little by it?
Sure, that's a really fair question. And I'm going to rephrase it in just a little bit of a different light. Our revitalization of the downtown has happened, and we're continuing that momentum. As I said, we have the state's longest historic downtown. I don't know the exact stat. I haven't asked for it in a couple of months. The last time I asked for it, we had just over 100 unique storefronts. 8 were vacant. That's a pretty great percentage. And the amount of private investment that we've seen in this community, the amount of sales of buildings and the improvements of those buildings is proof that revitalization is well underway. So we're not seeking to ignite a revitalization. We're seeking to do the public part of what the private industry has already begun. And we've done that through the investment in the town square. We've done that through the investment in the library. And what I always tell people is I think, private investments in this community have seen that our government is willing to meet them in this effort to continue the momentum in this community, and it just continues to multiply. The days of having, large stores in the downtown, whether it was, Klein's or a Maurice's or things like that, those aren't things that we're focusing on trying to replace. We have really unique boutiques and stores in the downtown that are doing very, very well. And we're seeing expansion of that. I mean, in just this year, during the pandemic, we've seen new people come into the downtown and new businesses come into the downtown. So I don't want anyone to leave thinking we're trying to light this fire. The fire's lit and it's going. We're just trying to ensure that we have enough foresight to meet the growth where it's at. And I'll say too, I'm from here, and I think of us as a small town too. We're the 34th largest city in the state. I got invited to this group called the Urban Alliance, which I'm now a president of, and I literally threw it away because I'm like, we're not urban. What are you talking about? But we are. 34th is pretty big. So we're not looking to be, in my opinion, or I think in the recommendations we've seen from this task force, like every other small town. We're looking to be the town that we already are and to continue that momentum. And the last thing I'll add to that is we've really started lining up the dominoes for this point. I don't know, maybe 5-6 years ago, we led a branding effort, and that branding effort was expensive. And it has paid for itself time and time again because it's given us an identity of who we are and what we should strive to be. And part of that is folded itself into these redevelopment plans. And those redevelopment plans have folded themselves into this task force. And then if you add in the appendages of all the private investment that we've seen, the one thing that I'll tell you is hopefully just some proof of what I'm selling here and saying here is that we have a developer that is not from Watertown. He's going to invest a $19 million investment in this downtown. And he didn't even know where Watertown was or who we were or what we did, but he heard about what was happening here privately and publicly, and he wants to be in first. Because he came, we've received a couple, if not 2 or 3 different investors from the Madison area that heard he's here and they want to be here too. So I think we're seeing, the chips start to fall. Alex wants to say something.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's all correct too, but just to go back to your question also, I think it's important to keep in mind the context of what we're talking about here today. So this is a piece of planning for that and making sure taxpayer dollars are spent effectively, because this was born out of the fact that there's aging infrastructure here along Main Street. The roads, the sidewalks, the pipes underground, all this needs to be replaced, and that's being responsible to the community and with taxpayer dollars to make sure that that's not a waste. That's not deteriorating to the point where then repair and reconstruction becomes even more expensive. What we're talking about with some of these design recommendations is, in my opinion anyway, kind of a smart investment, because it's operating on the margins of this reconstruction that's already going to take place. And if we can make these small, subtle changes or design changes that just enhance the appeal of our downtown and increase, the economic vibrancy of the downtown on the backs of this reconstruction and infrastructure effort that has to happen anyway in order for us to be efficient and effective for the next 40 years, to me that's a smart investment. And I know Lori wanted to say something as well.
Another thing that sets this effort apart from those done in so many other downtowns is that it's not just we decide what's best for you and then we do it. It's working directly with business owners to find out what their needs are. And I was really pleased to find out that this is a main focus of this downtown task force, is to work with individual business owners and find out what they need, not just come in with this big plan and do it, and then the business owners are left holding the bag. We never want to do that.
And then lastly, I just want to say that I appreciate your comments, because that's another role that the community should have. I mean, you should hold us accountable to what we're doing. So thank you for at least saying that and voicing that opinion.
It reminds me too, we should add in that our water main is from 1900. There's some late 1800s. So when we talk, we should probably add that to the beginning when we talk about why we're even talking about this. Someone had a question. Annie.
I do agree we are seeing storefronts fill up downtown. How are you going to balance all the delivery trucks we get during the week with making it pedestrian friendly and taking away those drop-off areas and the curb bump outs and things like that?
That's a fair question and a really good one. And one other person has asked us, like, well, are you going to get rid of heavy traffic? Well, we can't. The state DOT controls, it's called the connecting highway. So they control the traffic flow, they control the speed limit, they control which way we park cars, they control if we can have permanent bump outs and not. So the list is long. I think when it would come in particular to your deliveries in your store, that's where we would reach out to you and find the right solution for you, because your solution, given the fact that you're near a corner, is going to be far different than someone who's kind of buried into a city block, for example. Curb bump outs, I have to be honest, I shouldn't say this, because there's a lot of people that love them. Curb bump outs are really tough, really hard to maintain from a public works perspective. They kill blades on snowplows, and snowplow blades, you don't even want to know how expensive those are. So things like that are going to work their way. That's why it's going to Public Works. They'll make those difficult decisions on if those are things we proceed with. But I think as it would pertain to you and to your individual store, that's where your representative would work with you. Cool.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that kind of planning is part of what we're outlining in terms of looking at this transportation network as a whole and figuring out, because you're right, it's not only, we're not closing down Main Street so that people could just walk everywhere. There's a lot of, there's truck traffic, there's things that still have to happen. And so part of that is communicating with business owners downtown. Part of that is maybe planning and having a more comprehensive transportation network analysis. And then there are different strategies that are in place for that type of stuff as well that other communities do. I mean, maybe there's specific hours of the day or times where deliveries can happen. Not that I would advocate for that. That seems a little bit restrictive. But there are different ways to approach this and be creative in how we can kind of fit all of these moving parts together. But that's a very legitimate concern and something that we're going to have to address. Thank you.
Can I ask you to review the timeline one more time of the major events downtown? So library completion date, the town square.
I was like, I think that ironically is the slide that's on the screen. But so the library should be completed by the end of this calendar year with a official kind of grand reopening in January. The town square construction could start, as Alex said, in the winter. We plan to bid it in about a month, and then depending upon who the successful company is, if they have the capacity to start in the winter time, we'll start in the winter. Otherwise, that would happen in the spring, and that would be completed in 2022. The T-wall development would start. That's just to the south of the town square. That would start in 2023, and then. Am I missing anything else in there? And then this type of work, the output of this effort would start to sprinkle in between there, depending upon what it is. Like for the parking study will probably be done within the year. Is that what you were looking for?
And the bridge is?
Oh, sorry, I forgot the big one. The bridge is 2026. I have tried almost to the point where I'm ashamed of how much I've tried to move it up to 2024 because the bridge is in such a condition that it requires 6 month, on a 6 month clock, we have to do a maintenance inspection, and that costs money. And the DOT doesn't pay for that. And we've tried everything we can. They're holding tight to 2026. There was a different timeline well before. I don't even know what the date was, but I know there was one before. So people have said, is it really going to happen this time? And I feel pretty confident with how far down the road we are in their planning process that, barring some act of the legislature or a governor or a DOT secretary, we should be on course for 2026. Yeah.
Can you comment on the residential plan? I think you mentioned a couple times that I've heard the residential plan of a higher end condominiums or whatever, or larger apartments, and also is that a plan that is built on the hope or the vision of more private investors coming in, as you're seeing that already? Is that built on that hope?
Yeah, great question. So the development that I keep alluding to the south of the town square is 87 units. They are higher end, so wider hallways, insulated interior walls, stainless steel, granite countertops, everything from studio to 2-bedroom. 2 levels of underground parking, a 2nd-story courtyard with an infinity pool that looks out over the Rock River, which I think is really, really neat for the downtown. And just a really high-quality developer who builds and holds. So a lot of these developers will build and then sell that asset once it's built. But this particular developer holds it and then manages it himself. Well, not himself, but through his company. With that said, the vision is for more of those. So if this goes well, and he's hoping to be fully rented by the fall of 2023, if that rent up goes as well as he suspects it will, the intention is for a 2nd and a 3rd phase. So obviously the market will dictate that, not just the rental market, but the commodities markets, things like that will dictate that. But the idea is for more than one of these developments, because then his economy of scale is just better from a management perspective. I think in addition to that, there's some privately held properties throughout the downtown that are also, interested in different types of residential development, whether it's condominiums or apartments. I think the long and short, and undoubtedly someone in this room is wondering if these will become a different type of housing. And, the best thing I can say is the math doesn't work. You don't build high-end, multifamily housing with high-end finishes and infinity pool, and then it switches to an alternate style of housing. So, this developer has no history of that either.
If I could just make a few comments on that too. So, again, it's T-Wall Enterprises, and they do really high-quality work throughout the state. They're one of the larger multifamily companies, I believe, in the state. And they obviously saw something in the Watertown market, and I have my thoughts about what that is, and that's probably the fact that housing, rental, and owner-occupied housing is really short in stock. Watertown in particular. I'm looking for places to live here too, and it's challenging. So this fills a big hole in the housing market and the rental market in Watertown. And I think having those in place here, and I've talked about this a little bit before as well, it opens up other units. There may be people in the community right now or in the surrounding areas who may have the financial means to locate in those apartments and to move into those apartments. And so it's kind of a pressure relief valve. If they can then move into those units, or other people, maybe retirees, say well, they don't want their houses anymore, they can move into those units. That frees up some of these other units around the community for people who need those price points. So it's hard to look at that just in isolation. It's all part of a system, and I think it's going to be really beneficial on a lot of different levels.
One last question. Anyone?
I guess that maybe this is a good way to put an exclamation point at the end of the presentation today, but in light of everything that is happening in such a positive way in the downtown area and all of the things that are coming in the years to come, I think it is tremendously commendable that you're still able to keep a significant focus on other parts of the city. And I watched this year as various kinds of reconstruction and resurfacing projects were taking place on, a huge project on Air Park Drive and South 12th Street and in residential areas across the city. And it's very, very hard to balance the financial pressures when you're trying to do something very extraordinary in a part of the city to make a mark. And to keep it balanced and to be able to continue to do things that tremendously improve the community throughout the residential areas and other commercial areas in the city, I think is a great testimony to balanced and good government, and I wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you. I'll take that and leave. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you, Fred. And that's not bore on my shoulders alone. I have an incredible team that's bought into this kind of strategic vision and an incredible governing body that's bought into, so it's been a pleasure. Before I turn the mic over and no longer have your attention, I would be remiss to not just remind you all that we have a really profound schedule of events for Saturday for the 20th anniversary of 9/11. We'll be doing a larger ceremony at Arrow Park that starts at 9:30 in the morning. And we'll end by 10:28. That's our goal. That's when the last tower fell. And then there's a 5K, there's a freedom ride for motorcycles, and then we're also doing a volunteer event. We're doing a Rock River cleanup in the afternoon. There's a ton of information on our Facebook page. So I really want this to be a profound experience for us. You know, a lot of us in the room experience this firsthand, but I would encourage you to bring someone along who has no personal idea of what happened that day. My kids are skipping their first day of soccer in order to be there. I don't know that they know they're skipping their first day of soccer, but it's just really important. And a lot of our community organizations really came together. So I hope to see you guys there. And Alex would be upset if I didn't remind you to please grab either a paper survey or go to our website. Under development, you can see the survey, or grab that QR code and just put your camera on it, and it'll take you right to the survey too. The task force will be receiving all of this feedback. So we will get a recording of this and we jot all these down, but it certainly wouldn't hurt to also submit some of the feedback that you shared verbally through that survey as well.